I remember the morning my daughter called me about the house. Her voice had that same bright, breathless excitement I used to hear when she was 7 years old, running through the sprinkler in our backyard. She was 31 now, an accountant with a good job and a fiancé named Marcus. But in that moment on the phone, she was my little girl again. "Dad," she said, "we found it. It's perfect. You have to see it." I had retired 8 months earlier from 34 years at the plant. My pension, my savings, every dollar I'd put away instead of taking the vacations my late wife Diane used to beg me to book, all of it had been sitting there, waiting for a purpose. Diane passed 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 11 months from diagnosis to the funeral. After she was gone, the house on Redbird Lane felt like a museum nobody visited. Helping my daughter Claire buy her first home wasn't a financial decision. It was the last thing I had left to give her mother's memory. Claire and Marcus had been apartment hunting for almost a year. Everything in their budget was a shoebox with bad plumbing, and everything they loved was priced for people 20 years further into their careers than they were. When they found the house on Cypress Court, a 4-bedroom craftsman with a wraparound porch and an oak tree older than the neighborhood itself, Claire sent me 40 photos in one text message. I saw it and I understood. This was the house Diane would have wanted for her. And at the closing table, the loan officer explained it plainly. Marcus's credit was decent but thin. Claire's income alone wasn't enough to qualify for a house in that price range, not with the interest rates. That year, 5 p.m. They needed a cosigner, and when the numbers still didn't work, they needed a co-borrower. That meant my name wasn't just a formality stamped somewhere on a guarantee form. It went on the mortgage. It went on the deed. Legally, I wasn't just helping them buy a house. I owned a piece of it. I didn't think about it that way at the time. I thought about it as a bridge. My hands, signing my name in blue ink, connecting the life Diane and I built to the life our daughter was about to start. And I spent that whole first weekend with them, hauling boxes up the porch steps, assembling a crib for the nursery they were already planning, patching a hole in the drywall of what would become Marcus's home office. My back ached for a week afterward. It was worth every bit of it. Claire hugged me in the empty kitchen and said, "Dad, we could never have done this without you." And I believed her. I believed she meant it with her whole heart. That was 2 years ago. 2 years is not a long time, except when you are watching the space between phone calls stretch a little wider every month, and you tell yourself it's nothing. They're young. They're building careers. They're planning a wedding. I told myself I understood, because I did not want to be the father who calls too much, who shows up without being asked, who makes his own daughter feel crowded in a life she was trying to build for herself. But I noticed things, small things at first, so small I was almost embarrassed to notice them at all. Marcus's mother, a woman named Diane, no relation, a strange coincidence that used to make Claire laugh when they first met, though nobody laughed about it anymore, began coming to more and more of the family dinners. I don't say this with any resentment toward her son loving his mother. That's not what troubled me. What troubled me was the way the air in the room changed whenever I walked in and she was already there. A politeness that felt rehearsed. A stiffness in Claire's shoulders that hadn't been there before. When I would bring up something from Claire's childhood, a memory of her mother, a story about the two of us, Marcus's mother, whose name was Roberta, would find a way to redirect the conversation within 30 seconds. Smooth as anything. She'd ask Marcus about work, or compliment the appetizers, or mention something about her own daughter's upcoming baby shower, 3 states away. It was never rude. It was never rude. It was never anything you could point to and say, "There, that was cruel." It was just 100 small redirections, and after enough of them, I started to feel like a guest in a house I had helped pay for. I tried. God knows I tried. I brought flowers to every dinner. I remembered Claire and Marcus's anniversary before Marcus did, twice. I gave them a savings bond for their first Christmas as homeowners, folded inside a card that said, "For whatever comes next." Intention. Claire hugged me for that one too, but something had shifted, and I couldn't put my finger on what, or when, or why. There is a particular kind of loneliness that settles into a widower's chest, a low hum that never fully goes quiet. I didn't want Roberta to disappear from Marcus's life. I only hoped, in some small, foolish corner of my heart, that there might be room enough at that table for both of us. I was starting to understand there might not be. My son-in-law, and I did think of him as a son by then, had a way of going quiet whenever the temperature in a room dropped. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't even unkind. Not exactly. He was absent in the way that some men are present in the body, gone the moment there was any friction to manage. He'd change the subject. He'd suddenly remember a chore in another room. He'd look at his shoes. I told myself he was just trying to keep the peace between his wife and his mother, a difficult position for any young husband. I told myself a lot of things that year. Then, on a Thursday evening in early October, while I was eating leftover chili alone at my kitchen table, my phone rang and it was Claire. "Dad," she said. Her voice had a strange, careful quality to it, like she was reading from a script she'd practiced. "We're finally having people over to see the house properly. A little fall gathering, this Saturday. Roberta's coming, some of Marcus's co-workers, a few of my friends from the office. We'd love for you to be there." An invitation. After months of quiet, of shrinking phone calls, of feeling like a name on a lease rather than a father, I felt something loosen in my chest for the first time in a long while. I told her, of course, "Sweetheart, I wouldn't miss it," and I meant it with everything in me. I hung up the phone and I actually cried a little, standing there in my kitchen, holding a bowl of cold chili, feeling 70 years old and 12 years old all at once. I spent the whole week getting ready like it was my own wedding. I bought a new sport coat, a soft charcoal gray, because Claire had once told me gray made me look distinguished instead of just old. I got my hair cut. I polished the shoes I hadn't worn since Diane's funeral. On Friday night I drove 40 minutes to a specialty bakery Diane used to love and ordered a pie because I remembered Claire mentioning once, months ago, that Marcus loved a good pecan pie and never got one anymore. Claire texted me that Saturday morning. "Come around 3, Dad. Everyone else is coming at 4. We want to get a family photo done early, before it gets too crowded." A family photo. I read those 3 words maybe 6 times. I was still family. Of course I was still family. My name was on the house. The drive out to Cypress Court that afternoon was one of the most beautiful I can remember. The maples along the county road had turned a deep burnt orange, and the sky was that impossibly clean blue you only get in October, and I remember thinking, "This is a good day. This is going to be a good day. This is going to be a good day." My hands were sweating on the wheel anyway. I don't know why. Some part of an old man's body knows things before his mind is ready to admit them. And the house looked beautiful when I pulled up. There were pumpkins arranged along the porch steps, and a wreath of dried wheat and marigolds on the front door, and the driveway was already half full of cars, which struck me as odd for a gathering that wasn't supposed to start for another hour. I found a spot along the curb, gathered up the pecan pie from the passenger seat, and walked up the flagstone path toward the porch, feeling that same nervous, hopeful drumbeat in my chest that I used to feel walking Claire down the aisle rehearsal years from now, in my imagination, at a wedding I hadn't been invited to help plan. I was reaching for the door handle when I heard my name, "Mr. Whitfield." I turned around. It was Roberta, standing at the bottom of the porch steps in a cream-colored dress, her silver hair freshly set, a string of pearls, at her throat. She looked, I remember thinking, like she had stepped out of a furniture catalog. Her smile did not reach her eyes. "We're doing family photos in the back, by the oak tree," she said. "The photographer's already set up. If you wouldn't mind going around the side, we'd love to keep the front hallway clear for when the photographer wants natural light through the door." I stood there holding a pie in a cardboard box, and something in my stomach dropped an inch. I smiled anyway. "Of course," I said. "Happy to. I brought this," I added, holding out the pie, "for Marcus." She glanced at the box the way you'd glance at a piece of mail you already knew was junk. "That's sweet," she said, and did not take it. "I'll have someone bring it to the kitchen." And she turned and walked back inside through the front door I had just been redirected away from. I walked around the side of the house, past the garden hose coiled on its little wheel, past the trash cans someone had forgotten to bring in from the curb, and into the backyard where the party, evidently, had already started without me. There were 40, maybe 50 people scattered across the lawn, drinking cider and wine, a catering table groaning under trays of food I hadn't been told about, a string quartet, at a fall gathering playing something soft near the gazebo. This was not the small get-together Claire had described on the phone. This was, I understood slowly, an unveiling, a performance. The sex, and I had been invited to it the way you invite the plumber to admire the finished bathroom. I found Claire near the drink table, laughing at something one of her coworkers had said, radiant in a way I hadn't seen since her wedding day. When she saw me, something flickered across her face. Not joy, not quite panic either. Something more like management, the look of a woman recalculating a schedule. "Dad?" she said, crossing to me and taking the pie box out of my hands without really looking at it. "You made it." She set the pie on a side table, behind a floral centerpiece, where I noticed, over the next hour, it never moved again. "It's a lot busier than I said it would be," she added, a little breathless. "We're about to do the photos. Just give us a few minutes, okay?" She didn't hug me. In 2 years, I had never once left my daughter's presence without a hug. She turned and walked back toward Roberta, who was standing near the gazebo, directing people like a woman accustomed to being obeyed. And I stood there alone in a yard full of strangers, holding my empty hands at my sides, feeling the October wind cut through my new gray coat. The photographer, a young woman with 2 cameras around her neck, clapped her hands and called out, "Okay, let's get the immediate family together. First parents, the happy couple, siblings if you've got them, immediate family." I stepped forward. Of course, I stepped forward. I was her father. Claire turned, and for just a moment I watched her eyes do a fast, panicked search of the yard, looking for something, and then Roberta's voice cut smoothly across the lawn. "Claire, honey, why don't we get just the 2 families first, you know? The parents." Marcus's mother gestured to herself, and then, with an almost imperceptible pause, did not gesture to me. I looked at Marcus. He was looking at the grass. "Dad," Claire said, her voice gone thin and strange, we're going to do a small shot. First, just me, Marcus, and Roberta. It's a whole thing with the composition. The photographer wants a tighter group for the first one. We'll get you in the next round, I promise." I said okay. I actually said the word okay out loud, like it was a reasonable thing to be told. Standing in a yard I had helped buy, at a party for a house, with my name on the deed. "See?" Then Claire took my arm gently, the way you'd guide someone who was confused, someone elderly and a little lost, and walked me toward the oak tree at the edge of the property. I thought, foolishly for one whole second, that she was walking me into the frame. Instead, she positioned me just behind the trunk, in the tree's long shadow, and said, in a voice sweet enough to curdle milk, "We just need the shot to look clean, Dad. You understand. You understand. Just for this one." I was standing behind a tree at my own daughter's party. I could hear the photographer counting down. I could hear the shutter clicking over and over, a small mechanical sound that somehow felt louder than anything else in that yard. I peered through a gap in the leaves and watched them arrange themselves, Marcus in the center, Roberta on one side glowing with pride, Claire on the other, her smile so bright and practiced it didn't look like her at all. Marcus glanced once, quickly, toward the tree where I was standing. He didn't call me over. He looked away just as fast, like a man checking to see if a stove burner was still hot, confirming a fact he already knew and then going back to his life. "I want to tell you," I said something. "I want to tell you that some part of the man I used to be, the man who worked a factory floor for 34 years and never once let anyone push him around, stood up in that moment and said, 'I am her father, and my name is on this house, and I will not be hidden behind a tree like a stray dog.'" I didn't say any of it. I stood there, in the cold shade of that oak tree for nearly 20 minutes, watching the family I had helped build pose for a photograph I would never be allowed inside of, and I felt something in me, some old, patient, load-bearing wall begin, quietly, to crack. When the photos were finished, I walked away from the group without anyone noticing I'd left. I found a bench near the garden shed, half hidden by a stand of hydrangeas, and I sat down and put my face in my hands, and for a minute I let myself be exactly as old and as foolish as I felt. That's when I heard the voices. They were close, just on the other side of the shed, low enough that they clearly didn't know I was there. Roberta's voice first, sharp as a blade under all that southern honey. "I don't understand why you two keep inviting him to everything, Claire. He makes people uncomfortable." He was practically lurking by the front door earlier. Then Claire, quieter, but not disagreeing. He does try too hard sometimes. I know he means well, but it's exhausting, Mom. I heard Roberta again, and this time there was steel under the honey. Marcus, you need to learn to manage this. This is your house, your life. You cannot let her father make the two of you feel like you owe him something every time you walk through that front door. It's not healthy. I heard my son-in-law's voice then, low, and it cut into me sharper than anything Roberta had said. He helped us out a lot, Mom. That's true. But he's not. I don't know how to keep explaining to him that helping isn't the same as belonging. Claire made a small, tired sound. I just wanted today to be perfect, she said. We worked so hard on this house, on this whole life, and he just stands there and I feel like he's waiting for us to thank him every single time. It's like the house came with strings attached and I hate it. And then Roberta, with a briskness that told me this had already been discussed, already been decided, long before this party. His name on the title is just a technicality at this point, honestly. We'll refinance in a year or two once your salary bumps up, get him off the deed properly, and then this whole business will finally be behind you. I heard my son-in-law exhale. Yeah, he said. I know. We'll figure it out. It's just complicated right now. I sat on that bench in the cold October shade and I understood, fully and finally, what I had walked into. This was not a party. This was a quiet, well-mannered funeral for my place in my daughter's life, and everyone had gotten dressed up for it except me. But they had made one mistake. In their hurry to build a beautiful life and photograph it from every flattering angle, they had forgotten one small, stubborn fact. I was not merely a guarantor on a piece of paper somewhere in a filing cabinet. I was a co-owner of that house, in full, under the law, with a deed that had my name on it in the exact same size and the exact same ink as theirs. I had a copy in my glove compartment, tucked into a folder I'd carried in my car for 2 years out of nothing but sentiment, the way some men carry a photograph. I wiped my face, straightened my new gray coat, and walked back around to the front of the house. There was a small crowd gathered near the porch, people trickling in early for the 4 o'clock start, and among them was a heavy-set man in his 60s with a kind, weathered face, admiring a small brass plaque mounted beside the front door the kind builders put up with the house's construction date. He was talking to a younger couple. He was saying, I actually handled the closing paperwork on this place. I'm an old friend of Marcus's, from his first job out of college, used to work in title insurance before I retired. Funny thing about this house, it's not just in Marcus and Claire's name. There's a third owner on that deed, her father. Joint tenancy, the whole works. And, without his credit and his down payment, this deal never happens. The younger couple looked confused. Her father? One of them asked. He's here? Somewhere, the older man said, chuckling. Nice fella. I remember him from the closing. Never even met him at any of the parties, though, which always struck me as strange for a man who owns a third of the house. That was when I stepped forward. Actually, I said, I'm right here. The old man's face lit up with recognition. Peter Whitfield, he said. Bill. That was his name. I remembered it now. Bill Harmon. I was just telling these folks how impressive it was. You helping your daughter and her husband land a place like this. I saw Roberta's face appear in the front doorway behind him, drawn there by the sound of my name, spoken too loudly, too publicly. I watched the color drain out of her carefully powdered cheeks, in real time. Pole. Bill, she said, stepping out onto the porch, her voice pitched too high and too bright. That's really not something we need to get into right now. It's such old business. Why would it be old business? Bill asked, genuinely puzzled. It's a wonderful thing. Family, taking care of family. I looked at Roberta, and I felt something settle in me, cold and clear and entirely calm, like a lake freezing over in a single night. Roberta's right that it's old business, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I signed those papers 2 years ago. I gave up nearly everything I had saved across 34 years of work to make sure my daughter could have this house. My name has been on that deed since the very first day. And about 20 minutes ago, I was asked to stand behind a tree so I wouldn't ruin the family photograph. A few more guests had drifted close enough to hear. I saw Marcus appear in the doorway now too, his face going the color of ash. Dad, Claire said, arriving beside him. Please, Can we not do this here? I think we should do exactly this, here, I said, and I was surprised by how gentle my own voice sounded, even as the words landed like stones. I think the people at this party should understand exactly whose sacrifice this beautiful house was built on. I gave up my retirement for it. I am, as Bill so kindly pointed out, a legal co-owner of this home, and an hour ago I was hidden behind a tree so I wouldn't spoil a photograph of the family I apparently don't belong to. Nobody said anything. Somewhere behind them, the string quartet was still playing, absurdly, a few bright notes drifting out over a silence that had gone thick as syrup. "Peter," Roberta said, "you're causing a scene." "I'm not causing anything," I told her. "I'm simply telling the truth, out loud, to people who deserve to hear it before they eat any more of that very expensive cheese." I turned to Marcus. "I want to speak with you privately," I said, and something in my tone made him move immediately, and following me past the stunned caterers and through the front door I had been turned away from an hour earlier, into the living room, where I had helped him move a couch 2 years before. "Dad?" he started. "I swear I didn't know she was going to." "Don't," I said. I held up a hand, and to his credit, he stopped. "Here is what is going to happen, Marcus. Tomorrow, you and Claire are going to come to my house, and we are going to have a very honest conversation about a buyout. You will pay me the fair market value of my share of this home, or we will list the house and split what it sells for. I will not be erased from a home I paid to give you. Not quietly, and not at all." It says, "not quietly." "We can't afford a buyout, Dad," he said, his voice cracking. "Then you'll find a way," I said, "and I want you to hear this clearly, because I will only say it once. I did not give you a house, Marcus. I gave you a future. I gave up my own comfortable retirement to hand it to you and Claire, with both hands, and today, in front of 50 of your friends. And my own daughter hid me behind a tree so that I wouldn't embarrass her family portrait. I am not a bank. I am her father, and apparently that stopped meaning anything to either of you a long time before today. I walked out through that same front door, past the guests who didn't know where to look, past the caterers frozen mid-step with trays of food, and I did not look back once. I got in my car and I drove the 40 minutes home with my hands shaking on the wheel the entire way, not from fear, but from something that had been dammed up inside me for 2 solid years finally breaking loose all at once. My phone rang that whole evening. Claire, Marcus, Passes. Even once, Roberta, which I found almost funny, in a bitter sort of way. I let every call go to voicemail until the battery finally died somewhere around midnight, and I sat in my dark kitchen not answering, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I did not feel guilty about it. The next morning I drove to my attorney's office. A woman named Sandra Ruiz, who had handled Diane's estate years before and knew me well enough to see immediately that something was wrong. I told her everything: the loan, the deed, the tree, the conversation behind the shed. She pulled up the paperwork on her computer, read for a few minutes in silence, and then looked up at me with an expression I can only describe as quiet fury on my behalf. "Peter," she said, "you're not a guarantor here. You are a full co-owner of that property, in joint tenancy, exactly like Bill told those people at the party. There is no way for them to simply refinance you off this deed without your consent and without paying you fairly. The law is entirely on your side." There was a letter taped to my front door 2 days later, in Claire's handwriting, shaky in a way I had not seen since she was learning cursive in the 3rd grade. "Dad?" it read. "I don't know how to say how sorry I am. I let Roberta, I don't even know why I keep calling her that. I let her run the whole day and I let it happen to you and I hate myself for it. Please call me. Please don't shut me out. Please, please." I read it twice, standing on my own front porch, and I cried, but they were not the same tears I had cried behind that tree. These were older, sadder, and somehow cleaner. Grief for the daughter I remembered, running through a sprinkler, laughing so hard she couldn't breathe. But you cannot build trust back out of a single apology letter, and you certainly cannot build it while the person who wrote it is still living inside the very arrangement that caused the wound. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer, and I called Sandra and told her to list the house. It sold in 11 days, well above asking, to a young couple expecting their first child. The market had done what markets do, and my half of that sale was more money than I had ever held in my life. I did not feel triumphant when the wire transfer came through. I felt, mostly, tired, and a little bit like a man standing in the wreckage of something he had built with his own 2 hands and then had to watch someone else try to take credit for. Claire called again the week the house sold, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "Marcus is losing his mind. Dad," she said. "Roberta is furious. Everyone's blaming everyone. Please, can we just talk?" I listened to my daughter cry on the other end of the phone, and something in me that used to ache to fix every hurt she'd ever had simply did not move. The love was still there, buried somewhere under 2 years of small cruelties, and one long, cold afternoon behind a tree. But the trust was gone. And trust, I was learning at 63 years old, any two sex, Pernalla, does not come back just because someone finally admits they were wrong. "You didn't lose me today, sweetheart," I told her. "You lost me the day you let a woman I barely know direct me around my own house like hired help. You lost me the moment you decided a family photograph looked better without your father in it. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing it because I refuse to spend what's left of my life standing behind trees." I hung up. The calls kept coming for a while. Lawyers, real estate agents, even a stiff, formal voicemail from Roberta herself, which I deleted without listening to the whole thing. The story, as these things do in a small town, made its way around Claire's social circle fast. The perfect young couple with the beautiful new house, and the old man who'd apparently paid for half of it and gotten hidden behind a tree for his trouble. I heard, secondhand, that Marcus and Claire's marriage did not survive the fallout, that Roberta blamed her son-in-law for not controlling me, as if I were a dog that had slipped its leash rather than a grown man who had simply stopped tolerating being erased. I drove out to Cypress Court one last time before the closing, to walk through the empty rooms and say some kind of goodbye to the house I'd never really gotten to live inside of, not even for an afternoon. The furniture was gone. The walls were bare, scuffed pale rectangles where framed photographs used to hang photographs. I couldn't help noticing that I had never once appeared in. I stood at the living room window and looked out at that oak tree, small and unremarkable now in the gray light of a Tuesday afternoon, and it was strange how little power it held over me anymore. It was just a tree, a witness, maybe, but nothing more. Marcus was sitting alone on the front steps when I came back out. He'd lost weight. He looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in a month. "Dad?" he said quietly. He still called me that, and I noticed it, and did not correct him. "I'm sorry. I can't fix any of it." Claire moved back in with her sister. "I don't have the house anymore. I don't really have anything anymore." Says, I didn't feel the satisfaction I might once have imagined I would feel, hearing that. Mostly, I just felt hollow, and old, and very tired of the whole thing. "I'm sorry to hear it, son," I told him, and meant it. But she was never really the problem, Marcus. Roberta wasn't the problem either, not really. You were the one standing right there, every single time, watching it happen, and you never once said a word. You built your whole marriage around not upsetting the loudest person in the room, and I paid the price for that right alongside your wife. He started to cry then, right there on the porch steps, and asked if he could stay with me for a while, just until he got back on his feet. "No," I told him, as gently as I could manage. "You're a grown man. It's time you learned how to be one on your own." I didn't go to the closing. I let Sandra handle it. I didn't want to be in a room with Claire's lawyer explaining, line by line, how thoroughly I had once trusted her family. The money moved into my account like water into a basin, more of it than I had ever seen at one time, and none of it felt like the thing I actually wanted, which was simply to have been let into that photograph. Months passed, slower than I expected, and then, somehow, faster than I expected too. I started going to the senior center on Tuesdays and Thursdays, mostly because a neighbor kept pestering me to try the pinochle games, and I discovered I still had a decent memory for cards. I took long walks along the river path near my house, something Diane and I used to do together every fall, and for the first time in years I noticed the trees turning color the same way I used to notice them beside her. The anger did not disappear so much as it settled, the way sediment settles in a glass of water left alone long enough. I understood something, sitting on a park bench one gray November afternoon, watching a heron stand motionless in the shallows. I had spent 2 years trying to earn a place at a table that had already decided, quietly and long before I ever noticed that there wasn't room for me. And the only person who could ever fix that, in the end, wasn't Claire, and wasn't Roberta, and certainly wasn't Marcus. It was me. It had always only ever been me. It was nearly 7 months after the house sold when I opened my front door one cold evening in May and found Claire standing on my porch. She looked different, thinner, the polish gone from her, dressed plainly, no makeup, her hair pulled back the way she used to wear it in college. She looked, more than anything, like herself again. "Dad," she said, "I don't have a house to offer you dinner in anymore. I don't have a husband. I've been staying with Aunt Ruthie and trying to figure out who I actually am underneath all of that. But I have a question, and I don't think I can really move forward with my life until I ask it." I stood in the doorway and waited. "That day," she said, her voice trembling, "at the party, when Roberta had me put you behind the tree, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you just walk into that photo and stand there and make them deal with it? You just let it happen, Dad. I've thought about it every single day since, and I don't understand." I looked at my daughter for a long moment, feeling the whole weight of that October afternoon settle back over me one more time. "Because I was waiting for you," I said finally. "I was waiting for you to turn around and say, 'Dad, come stand here, you belong in this picture.' That's all I wanted, the entire day. Not an apology afterward. Just one moment, in the moment where you chose me out loud, in front of everyone. You never did. So when I finally did speak up, it wasn't going to be my voice that did it. It was going to be my actions." She started to cry, standing there on my porch in the cool spring evening, and after a moment she came forward and put her arms around me the way she used to when she was small enough for me to lift off the ground, and I held on to my daughter and let her cry into my shoulder the way I once let her cry over skinned knees and broken hearts and every other small catastrophe of growing up. "Come inside," I told her. "We have a lot of ground to cover." She nodded, wiping her face, and followed me through the door. And maybe, in the quiet of that kitchen, over 2 cups of coffee that went cold before either of us finished them, something in both of us that had been standing behind a tree for a very long time finally stepped out into the light. Respect, I have come to understand, is never inherited simply because you share a name or a bloodline. It has to be built deliberately every single day, and once you let it crumble, rebuilding it takes far longer than tearing it down ever did. The justice was in the truth finally being spoken aloud on that porch. The justice was in the sale of that house. But the healing, what little of it came, was in a cup of cold coffee, shared quietly between a father and a daughter who were both, finally, willing to admit exactly how much they had lost.